Sometimes doing the right thing looks exactly like doing the wrong one. The security camera caught it from above, a grainy black and white angle that flattened everything into shapes and shadows. But it was clear enough to start the whispers. Marcus Reed stepping past the front desk, not checking in, not slowing down, his worn jacket brushing against the polished marble as if he didn't belong there. And maybe he didn't, not in a place like Hale Biotech, where the air smelled like money and quiet authority, where people moved with purpose and never without permission. But Marcus didn't stop. He couldn't. Not today. Not with the clock on his phone ticking louder than the murmurs behind him. 2:17 p.m., 15 minutes past when he was supposed to be somewhere else, somewhere more important than rules, somewhere that didn't have polished floors or silent judgment. His daughter's small backpack still slung over his shoulder like a reminder he refused to put down, the zipper half broken, a corner of a crayon drawing peeking out, bright against everything else that felt cold. He reached the elevator and pressed the button harder than necessary, his reflection staring back at him in the brushed steel doors, older than he felt, more tired than he would admit. And when the doors opened, he stepped in without hesitation, ignoring the voice behind him calling out, "Sir, you can't go up there." Because stopping meant explaining, and explaining meant time. And time was the one thing he didn't have. The elevator climbed, floor by floor, each number lighting up like a countdown he couldn't reset. 18, 19, 20, his hand tightening around the strap of that backpack, knuckles pale, not from fear, but from something deeper, something quieter, the kind of resolve that doesn't announce itself. It just moves. And when the doors opened again, the top floor was waiting, all glass walls and controlled silence. A space where decisions were made that changed lives without ever raising a voice. And that's where she was, Victoria Hale, standing near the window, her back straight, phone in hand, listening more than speaking, her presence alone enough to still a room. And she noticed him. Immediately, not because he belonged there, but because he didn't, because he moved with urgency instead of permission, because he carried something no one else in that building seemed to carry, weight that wasn't measured in dollars or titles, just seconds, just stakes no one else could see. "You're not authorized to be here," she said, her voice calm, not loud, not angry, just certain. And for a moment, everything paused, the assistants, the quiet tapping of keyboards, even the city outside. Those windows felt distant. Marcus stopped then, finally, not because of her authority, but because he had reached the edge of what he could push without breaking something he couldn't fix. He turned to face her, eyes steady, no apology in them, no defiance either, just something harder to name, something that didn't need words. "I had to," he said, simple, flat, as if that explained everything. And maybe to him it did, but to her, to everyone watching, it wasn't enough. It never was, because in a world like this, reasons had to be proven, justified, documented, and he had none of that, just a worn jacket, a child's backpack, and a sentence that hung in the air longer than it should have. "I had to." And somewhere in that silence, before anyone spoke again, before security stepped forward, before judgment fully settled into place, Victoria noticed something small, something almost invisible, the edge of that crayon drawing slipping further out of the bag, bright, careless, completely out of place in a room built on control. And for the briefest second, it didn't fit the story she was already writing about him. And that was the first crack. The room did not erupt, it tightened, like a breath held too long. And the first to move were not the executives but the security team standing near the glass doors, their posture shifting from passive to precise, trained to respond without hesitation, one step forward, then another, controlled, professional, as if this moment had already been rehearsed somewhere in a manual Marcus had never read. "Sir, I need you to come with us," one of them said, voice low, respectful but firm, the kind of tone that assumed compliance. But Marcus did not move, not yet, his eyes flicking once toward the hallway behind Victoria, toward a closed door at the far end, unmarked, quiet, important, his focus locking there for just a second too long. And Victoria saw it. She noticed where he was looking, not at her, not at the guards, but past them, as if something beyond her authority mattered more than her presence. And that did not sit right. Not in a building where attention was currency, and he had just ignored its most valuable source. "You Have 10 seconds to explain why you are here, she said, her voice unchanged, still calm, still controlled, but now edged with something sharper, not anger, but expectation. And again, he did not give her what she wanted, no long explanation, no rushed apology, just that same quiet resistance. I told you. I had to. And it landed heavier the second time, not louder, just more final, like a door closing instead of opening. Behind him, someone whispered. Another voice murmured something about policy, about liability, about how this was already too far, and the guards moved closer, close enough now that the distance between decision and action had nearly disappeared. And then something small happened, something easy to miss if you were not already watching closely. The backpack slipped from Marcus's shoulder and hit the floor with a soft, uneven thud, not loud, not dramatic, but enough to break the stillness. The zipper gave way a little more, and the contents shifted, spilling just enough to be seen. A folded worksheet with large, uneven handwriting, a plastic pill bottle with a pharmacy label, a small inhaler rolling slightly before stopping against the polished floor, and Marcus reacted instantly, dropping to one knee, not to defend himself, not to argue, but to gather those things quickly, carefully, like each second they were exposed mattered, like each item was more important than the room full of eyes watching him. And that was when the second crack formed, because people who were reckless did not move like that. They did not protect small things with that kind of urgency. Victoria's gaze dropped, not to him, but to the label on the bottle, the name printed there, not his, not Marcus Reed, but Lila Reed. And something in her expression shifted, just slightly, not enough for anyone else to see, but enough for her to feel it, a detail that did not match the narrative forming in her mind. You brought a child's medical supplies into a restricted executive floor, she said, not accusing, just stating, testing, and Marcus paused, just for a fraction of a second. The kind of pause that said more than any explanation could, before he stood again, the items back. In the bag, the zipper pulled as far as it would go. I did not have a choice, he said, and this time, it sounded different, not defensive, not desperate, just true. And that word lingered in the space between them longer than the rules, longer than the tension, longer than the quiet hum of a building that suddenly felt like it was listening. No one spoke for a moment, and in that silence, the building seemed to recalibrate around a detail it was not designed to hold. A child's name sitting quietly inside a room built for contracts and controlled outcomes. And Victoria felt it before she understood it. That slight misalignment between what she was seeing and what she had already decided. But she did not step back from her position. She did not soften. Because leadership in her world was not about reacting to feelings. It was about maintaining order even when something unexpected tried to disrupt it. That still does not explain why you are here, she said, her voice steady, but now carrying a quieter weight, less authority, more inquiry, and Marcus met her gaze this time, not challenging, not pleading, just present, as if he had already accepted whatever came next. She is upstairs, he said, simple, direct, and the room shifted again, not with noise, but with attention, because that sentence did not belong to the script anyone had prepared. Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion, but in calculation. There are no children on this floor, she replied, immediate, certain, because she knew her building, she knew its policies, its structure, its security layers. Everything was accounted for, everything except this, and Marcus did not argue. He did not correct her. He only nodded once, as if acknowledging that her version of the truth existed, just not the one that mattered right now. She was not supposed to be, he said, and that was when the third crack appeared, because now it was no longer just about him breaking rules. It was about something else slipping through a system that prided itself on never missing anything. Victoria turned slightly, her attention shifting toward her assistant, a silent question passing between them, and within seconds, a tablet was in her hand, fingers moving quickly, pulling up internal logs, access points, security feeds, all the invisible threads that held her world together. And for a moment, she said nothing, her eyes scanning, searching, confirming, and then pausing, just for a fraction too long. Because there it was, a temporary clearance issued less than an hour ago, medical vendor access, level restricted, signed off under an emergency clause she rarely used, and the name attached to that clearance was not Marcus Reed. It was a third party, but the timestamp matched his arrival, and suddenly his presence was no longer random. It was connected. "You are not authorized personnel," she said again. But this time it sounded different. Less like a conclusion, more like a question she had not finished asking. Marcus shifted his weight slightly, not uncomfortable, just aware that the moment was turning. "I never said I was," he replied, and behind that calm answer was something else, something that did not need to be spoken, because it was already visible in the way he stood there, in the way he had gathered that backpack, in the way he had chosen silence instead of defense. And Victoria felt it again, that quiet resistance to being fully understood, not because he was hiding something, but because what he was protecting mattered more than being believed. She handed the tablet back without looking away from him, her mind moving faster now, connecting details that did not belong together: a child's medication, an emergency clearance, a man who risked walking into the most restricted space in the building without hesitation, and none of it pointed to recklessness. It pointed to urgency, the kind that did not ask for permission. "If what you are saying is true," she began, her tone softer now, but sharper in focus, "then you just bypassed 3 levels of security to reach someone who should not be here." Marcus did not deny it, did not confirm it. He simply said, "I reached her." And that was the moment everything shifted, not visibly, not dramatically, but internally, where decisions are made before they are announced. Because for the first time, Victoria was no longer asking what he had done wrong. She was asking what she had missed, and that question carried far more weight than any rule he had broken. Victoria did not respond immediately, and that silence carried more authority than any command she could have given, because now the room was no longer waiting for her decision. It was waiting for her understanding, and that was not something she rushed, her gaze drifting briefly toward the closed door at the end of the hallway, the same door Marcus had looked at, the one tied to that emergency clearance. And for the first time since he walked in, she stepped forward instead of holding her ground, one measured step, then another, her heels quiet against the marble, not dramatic, not rushed, just deliberate. "Stay here," she said to the security team, not raising her voice, but shifting control without effort. And they obeyed instantly, because this was her domain, and when she moved, the system adjusted around her. Marcus did not follow. He did not speak. He simply stood where he was, his eyes tracking her movement only for a second before returning to stillness, as if he had already gone as far as he needed to go, and whatever came next was no longer his to control. Victoria reached the door and paused, her hand resting lightly against the handle, not opening it right away, because in that brief moment, something unfamiliar settled in, not hesitation, but awareness, the understanding that whatever was on the other side might not fit the order she had built. And then she opened it, slowly, without announcement, and the room beyond was not what anyone outside would have expected. It was smaller, quieter, not a boardroom, not a place for deals or decisions, but a temporary medical suite, clean, functional, with equipment that hummed softly in the background. And in the center of it, sitting on the edge of a narrow bed, was a young girl, no older than 8, her legs swinging slightly, as if she had been waiting too long, her hair pulled back unevenly, her eyes scanning the room with a kind of tired alertness that did not belong to someone her age. And beside her stood a nurse, mid-sentence, explaining something in a gentle tone that stopped the moment Victoria entered. "Miss Hale, we were just—" the nurse began, but Victoria raised a hand slightly, not to silence, but to pause, because her attention had already shifted, not to the staff, not to the equipment, but to the girl, and more specifically, to what she was holding, a piece of paper, crumpled slightly at the edges, covered in bright, uneven lines of crayon, the same colors that had peeked out of Marcus's bag, the same kind of drawing that did not belong in a place like this. And the girl looked up, her eyes meeting Victoria's without fear, just curiosity, the kind that had not yet learned to measure status or authority. "Are you the boss?" she asked, her voice small but steady. And the question landed in a way Victoria was not prepared for, not because of what it meant, but because of how simply it was asked, without weight, without expectation. Just a child trying to understand the room she had been placed in. Victoria took another step forward. Slower now, her usual certainty replaced by something quieter, Something more careful. Yes, she said. And for once, the word felt different, not like a position, but like a responsibility she had not fully accounted for. The girl nodded as if that answered something important, then held up the drawing slightly. My dad said I should stay here and not move, she said. And there it was, the final piece settling into place. Not dramatic, not loud, just clear, and Victoria felt it in the same quiet way the cracks had formed before, one detail at a time. Until the picture was no longer what she thought it was, she turned her head slightly, glancing back toward the hallway where Marcus stood. Still, waiting, not for forgiveness, not for approval, just for time. And for the first time, she did not see a man who had broken her rules. She saw a father who had followed a different one. Victoria did not take the drawing right away. She only looked at it, the uneven lines, the bright colors pressed too hard into cheap paper, shapes that did not follow rules but still made sense if you stopped trying to control them. And that was the part that unsettled her, not the drawing itself, but how easily it existed in a place that had no space for it. What is your name? She asked, her voice softer now, not because she intended it, but because the room demanded it. The girl shifted slightly on the bed, her legs still swinging in a slow, absent rhythm. Lila, she said, then added with quiet certainty, Lila Reed. And the name landed exactly where it needed to, connecting everything that had not made sense before. Victoria nodded once, absorbing it, not reacting outwardly, but inside something had already moved. And your father brought you here? She asked, careful with her words now, and Lila nodded again, holding the drawing closer to her chest for a second before lowering it. He said this was the safest place, she replied, simple, unfiltered, and the sentence carried no doubt. No question, just trust, the kind that is given without negotiation. Victoria glanced briefly at the nurse, who stepped forward slightly, filling in what the child did not explain. She had an episode at school earlier today, the nurse said quietly. Professional but measured. Her inhaler was not enough, and her father contacted a medical partner we have on contract. They authorized temporary use of this suite under emergency protocol. Victoria listened without interrupting, her eyes returning to Lila, who was now watching her with a calm that did not match the situation, as if this room, this moment, was something she had already accepted long before anyone else understood it. And he stayed? Victoria asked, though she already knew the answer, and the nurse hesitated just slightly before responding. He was not supposed to come up, only the transport team had clearance, but he insisted on walking her himself. And there it was, not defiance, not arrogance, just a decision made outside the system because the system was not fast enough. Victoria exhaled slowly, not a sigh, just a release of something she had been holding without noticing, her gaze dropping again to the drawing. And this time she reached for it, gently, careful not to crease it further. Lila let her take it without resistance, watching closely as if it mattered what the woman in front of her saw. And on the page, between uneven shapes and bold colors, was something unmistakable. Two figures, one tall, one small, holding hands, standing in front of a building with too many windows, the proportions wrong, the lines imperfect, but the meaning clear, and above them, written in large, careful letters that did not quite stay on the line, were the words, "Dad keeps me safe." Victoria held the paper a moment longer than necessary, not because she was analyzing it, but because she could not immediately place what she was feeling. It was not guilt, not yet, not fully. It was something quieter, something closer to recognition. She handed the drawing back, her fingers brushing the edge lightly, then turned toward the door without another word. And when she stepped back into the hallway, everything was exactly where she had left it. The guards, the staff, the tension still suspended in place, and Marcus, standing exactly as before, not pacing, not arguing, just waiting, his eyes lifting to meet hers, not searching for approval, not asking for anything, just steady. And for the first time since this began, Victoria did not see a disruption in her system. She saw the reason it had been disrupted, and that changed the weight of every decision that followed. Victoria did not speak right away, and that silence shifted the entire room more than any command could have, because it was no longer the silence of control, it was the silence of reconsideration, and everyone felt it, even if they did not understand why. The guards glanced at each other briefly, uncertain whether to proceed or hold position. The assistants lowered their voices to nothing. The building itself seemed to pause, waiting for a decision that had already begun to change shape. Victoria stepped fully back into the space, her posture still composed, still precise. But something in her expression had softened in a way that did not weaken her authority, it refined it. "Everyone return to your stations," she said, her voice calm, even, and immediate, and the effect was instant. The tension did not break, it dissolved, like something that had never been meant to stay that long. The guards stepped back without question. The hallway resumed its quiet rhythm, and within seconds, the moment that had drawn every eye was no longer public. It was contained, just as she intended, but Marcus remained exactly where he was, because his moment had never been about the room. It had always been about the door behind her. Victoria turned toward him, closing the distance slowly, not with urgency, but with intention. And when she stopped a few feet away, she studied him again, not as a problem, not as a disruption, but as a man who had made a choice she had not accounted for. "You bypassed security," she said, not accusing, just stating the fact as it existed. And Marcus nodded once, accepting it without resistance. "Yes," he replied, and there was no apology in it. Not because he did not understand the rules, but because he understood something else more clearly. "You put my company at risk," she continued, her tone still measured, still professional, but now layered with something more complex. And again, he did not argue. "Yes," he said, the same steady acknowledgement, and for a moment, they stood there in a kind of balance, her world defined by structure, his defined by necessity, neither canceling the other, just existing side by side. And then she asked the question that mattered, not to the company, but to the truth she was trying to understand. "Why did you not wait for the authorized team?" And Marcus did not answer immediately, not because he was searching for words, but because he was deciding how much to say in a place that did not trade in explanations like his. He glanced briefly toward the door, just a flicker, then back to her. "Because she was scared," he said, and the simplicity of it cut through everything else. No technical justification, no appeal to policy, just a father naming the one thing that mattered. And it landed in a way that no report ever could. Victoria held his gaze, and for the first time, she did not measure his answer against protocol. She measured it against something she had not used in a long time, something quieter, something that did not live in spreadsheets or boardrooms. And she found no inconsistency there, no attempt to manipulate, just truth, plain and unguarded. She exhaled slowly, then shifted slightly, her weight redistributing as if a decision had just settled into place. "Next time," she said, and the words caught the attention of everyone within earshot, even those pretending not to listen. "You inform my office directly," she continued, her tone firm again, but not cold. "You do not force your way into restricted areas." And Marcus listened, not interrupting, not pushing back, just absorbing what was being offered. Not punishment, not dismissal, but a boundary redrawn instead of enforced. And then she added, quieter, almost as if it was not meant for the room. "But you do not leave her alone either." And that was the moment the balance tipped, not dramatically, not visibly, but completely, because in that sentence, she acknowledged both worlds at once, the system and the reason it had been broken. Marcus nodded once more, slower this time, not just acceptance, but recognition, and for the first time since he had stepped into that building, something in his posture eased, not relief, not gratitude, just the release of knowing that he no longer had to choose between being a father and being understood. And Victoria turned away then, not waiting for thanks, not needing closure, because the decision had already done what it needed to do. It had not fixed the system, but it had made room for something it had not been built to hold. The hallway returned to its quiet rhythm, but something had shifted beneath the surface, something that did not announce itself with noise or movement, just a subtle change in how space was held, and Marcus felt it before he understood it, the way the air no longer pressed against him, the way no one was watching him like a problem that needed to be solved, and he did not linger there. He did not test the boundaries that had just been redrawn. He simply turned and walked toward the door at the end of the hall, steady, unhurried, as if every step had already been decided long before he entered this building. And when he reached it, He paused only long enough to breathe once, slow and quiet, then opened it and stepped inside, the room meeting him with the same soft hum of machines and controlled calm. And Lila looked up immediately, her eyes finding him with a kind of certainty that did not need to check if he would come back. "You said not to move," she said, her voice small but matter of fact, and Marcus nodded, stepping closer, setting the backpack down beside the bed before crouching to her level, not towering over her, not rushing, just meeting her where she was. "You did good," he said, his voice low, steady, and she smiled, not wide, not exaggerated, just enough to show that the world had shifted back into place for her. And that was all she needed. The nurse stepped aside quietly, giving them space without making it noticeable, because some moments did not need to be managed, they just needed to be allowed. Marcus reached into the bag and pulled out the inhaler, checking it with practiced hands. Not hurried, not unsure, just careful. And Lila watched him the way children watch something they trust completely, not analyzing, not questioning, just knowing. "Are we going home now?" she asked, and he hesitated for a fraction of a second, not because he did not want to answer, but because he was measuring what home meant after a day like this. "Soon," he said, and she accepted it without pushing, because soon, to her, meant he was still there, and that was enough. Outside the room, Victoria did not return to her office immediately. She stood in the hallway just out of view, not listening in, not intruding, but not leaving either, her attention fixed on something she had not expected to stay with her. And through the slight opening of the door, she caught only fragments, a quiet voice, a soft response, the rhythm of something steady, something grounded, and it did not fit into any report she had ever read, any structure she had ever built. It was not efficient, it was not measurable, but it was undeniable. She turned her gaze toward the floor for a moment, her reflection faint in the polished surface, and for the first time in a long time, she was not thinking about outcomes, or projections, or control. She was thinking about presence, about what it meant to show up when it mattered, even if it meant breaking something to do it. And she realized something then, something simple but difficult to ignore, that her world had been built to prevent disruption, but not necessarily to recognize why disruption happened. And that difference, small as it seemed, was where everything had shifted. Inside the room, Marcus adjusted the strap of Lila's backpack, making sure it sat comfortably on her shoulder, his movements quiet, efficient, shaped by habit rather than instruction, and when he stood, she reached for his hand without looking, her fingers finding his as if they had done it 1,000 times before, and he held it without hesitation, without thought, just instinct. And as they moved toward the door together, he paused, just for a second, not turning, not looking back, but aware that something had changed beyond that room, something that would follow them even after they left, not as a debt, not as a favor, but as a recognition that could not be undone. And when the door opened again, Victoria stepped aside without being asked, not making it a gesture, not making it visible, just creating space. And Marcus nodded once as he passed, not gratitude, not obligation, just acknowledgement, and she returned it with the same quiet precision, because some things did not need to be said to be understood. They did not rush to the elevator, and that in itself said everything, because nothing about the moment felt urgent anymore, not in the way it had before, when seconds had weight and decisions had to be made without permission. Now each step Marcus took was steady, measured, his hand holding Lila's with a quiet certainty that did not need to tighten or guide, just present, and she walked beside him with that same calm, her small backpack bouncing lightly against her side, the uneven zipper still holding, the drawing safe inside, and the hallway that once felt like a barrier now opened without resistance. People moved out of the way without being asked, not out of authority, but out of something less defined, something closer to respect, though no one would say it out loud. And Victoria watched them until they reached the elevator, her posture unchanged, her expression composed, but her attention lingering longer than it should have, as if she was trying to understand not what had happened, but what it meant. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and Marcus stepped inside with Lila, pressing the button without hesitation, and just before the doors closed, Lila turned her head slightly, looking back toward Victoria, not with recognition of power, but with simple curiosity. "Bye," she said, her voice light, unburdened, and it caught Victoria off guard in a way no boardroom ever had, because it was not directed at her title, it was directed at her presence. And for a brief moment, she did not respond, not because she chose silence, but because she was not used to being addressed like that, without expectation, without distance. And then she nodded once, small, almost imperceptible, but enough, and the doors closed, sealing the moment in a way that felt final and unfinished at the same time. The elevator descended, carrying Marcus and Lila back into a world that did not measure them the way this building did, and the hallway behind Victoria resumed its rhythm. Conversations picking back up, footsteps returning to their precise patterns. But something had changed, not in the structure, not in the rules, but in the way she held them. She turned slowly and walked back toward her office, each step as controlled as before, but now accompanied by a thought she could not set aside. The image of that drawing, the words written in uneven letters, and the way they had carried more clarity than any report she had read that morning. She entered her office and closed the door behind her, the city stretching out beyond the glass, vast and ordered and predictable. But her mind did not return to the numbers waiting on her desk. It returned to a single moment, a man standing in defiance of a system not to challenge it, but to protect something it could not account for. And she realized that control had never been the same as understanding, that efficiency had never been the same as care, and that somewhere between those two, something essential had been missing. She moved to her desk, but did not sit, her fingers resting lightly against the surface as if grounding herself in a space that suddenly felt different, not weaker, not uncertain, just incomplete in a way she had not allowed herself to see before. And for the first time in years, she did not reach for her phone. She did not call for an update or issue a directive. She simply stood there, letting the quiet settle, not as a tool, but as a presence, the kind that could reveal things if you stopped trying to control them. And in that stillness, she understood something simple, something that did not need to be written down, that what Marcus had done was not a disruption to her system. It was a reminder of what her system was supposed to serve. And that recognition did not demand a change in policy. It demanded a change in perspective, one that would not announce itself, but would show up in the decisions she made next, in the space she allowed, in the moments she chose to see rather than manage. And somewhere far below, the elevator doors opened, and a father and his daughter stepped back into the world, unchanged in who they were, but having left behind something that would not stay contained within the walls they walked out of. The next morning did not arrive with any announcement, no shift in the skyline, no signal that anything had changed, but inside Hale Biotech, something subtle had already taken root, not in the structure of the building, not in the policies written across internal systems, but in the way one decision echoed quietly into the next. Victoria sat at her desk with a report open in front of her, the numbers precise, the projections clean, everything exactly as it should be, and yet her attention drifted, not away from her work, but through it, as if something beneath the surface now required her to look twice, to see not just what was written, but what was missing. Her assistant stepped in with a tablet, listing the day's priorities, meetings stacked back to back, decisions waiting to be made, and Victoria listened, nodding occasionally, her responses sharp, efficient, unchanged in tone. But when the assistant mentioned the medical vendor contract, the one tied to emergency clearances, Victoria paused, just slightly, enough to interrupt the rhythm. "Expand the protocol," she said, her voice calm, deliberate. "Add a direct notification line to my office for any case involving minors." The assistant hesitated for a fraction of a second, surprised not by the request, but by its specificity, then nodded and moved to implement it without question, because this was how change happened in her world, not loudly, not publicly, but through precise adjustments that altered the system without announcing it. Later that afternoon, in a part of the city far removed from glass towers and controlled environments, Marcus stood outside a small pharmacy, the kind with a faded sign and a bell that rang too loud when the door opened. Lila beside him, holding a paper bag with both hands as if it contained something fragile, something important, and in a way, it did. He glanced down at her, checking not just that she was there, but that she was steady, that the quiet from the day before had settled into something lighter. "You feeling okay?" he asked, his voice low, and she nodded, swinging the bag slightly. I am good, she said. Simple, certain, and he believed her, not because everything was fixed, but because she trusted him enough to say it. And that was what mattered. They walked toward an older pickup truck parked along the curb, its paint worn but clean, its presence familiar. And as Marcus opened the passenger door for her, she paused, looking up at him with the same curiosity she had shown the day before. Are we going back there? She asked, and he followed her gaze, not to a building, not to a place, but to the memory of it, the moment that had shifted something neither of them had words for. He considered the question for a second, not dismissing it, not answering too quickly. Maybe, he said, and she nodded as if that was enough, climbing into the seat and placing the bag carefully in her lap. Back in her office, Victoria stood by the window again, the city stretching out beneath her in its usual order, her reflection faint against the glass. And for a moment, she allowed herself to stand there without an agenda, without a task, just observing, not the skyline, but the thought that had stayed with her since the day before. That power did not always come from control. Sometimes it came from knowing when not to enforce it, when to make space for something the system could not anticipate. And she realized that what had happened was not a disruption to be corrected. It was a moment that had revealed a gap she had not seen. And now that she had seen it, she could not unsee it. She turned away from the window, her posture unchanged, her steps steady as she returned to her desk. But something within her had shifted in a way that did not need to be announced. It would show itself in the quiet decisions, in the moments no one thought to measure. And somewhere across the city,